was treated almost like a criminal. I didn't do anything wrong. And in fact, I'm really smart. I have great ideas. What is going on? Why does this keep happening? And it was sort of in that moment I realized like the people that were still left in their chairs, they were really good at speaking up. They were really good at interrupting and making sure their voice got heard. They were really good at getting credit for their ideas. And I wasn't. Psychological safety is this feeling that you can speak up without judgment, without retaliation of your ideas, any fear-based feeling that you have about speaking in a container, and the container is usually the organization. So psychological safety allows you to be more of who you are. We can only do that if the culture around us allows for that. There's certain people that just are yes-based. They just keep saying yes to things because there's a fear that maybe they'll lose their job, or maybe there's downsizing going on and they want to keep their job. So they just keep saying yes, 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 I'll take that on, I'll take that on, I'll take that on. And then you get home and you have to take care of your family or take care of your home. And it's just this recipe for burnout. Each dosha has a prime time when that dosha is the most alert, active, and aware. So if you're going to have a challenging conversation, difficult work to do, you want to make sure you bucket it in that time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Illuminating Dialogues number 29. We have the pleasure of sitting down with Neelu Kaur today. How are you, Neelu, and where are you coming from?
New York, and I'm very well, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, and I'm so grateful just for the time. Like you said, it's been a long time in the making, so I'm so
Yes.
excited to sit down with you and talk about corporate culture, burnout, your book, Be Your Own Cheerleader. Hopefully, if you have time, some yoga, ayurveda.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
But before we dive into that, I'd love to give a short introduction for the viewers who might not be familiar with you. So, Neelu Kaur is an author of the book, as you can see here, Be Your Own Cheerleader, keynote speaker, and organizational psychologist, showing people how to self advocate for their ideas, leading to happier, healthier employees and more innovative, competitive organizations. I think we all want that. Neelu is a certified NLP, neuro linguistic programming coach, Ayurvedic specialist, trained hypnotherapist, holding a Bachelor of Science from the New York University Stern School of Business and Master of Arts in Social Organizational Psychology from Columbia University. Neelu has worked with renowned organizations such as Google, Deloitte, Colgate, Palmolive, and Sony Music, having a multi-dimensional approach to leadership, development, and building inclusive cultures, helping unleash innovation by elevating every voice. So much expertise, so much wisdom there. As I read that out, I'm so excited to sit down in this dialogue with you. This podcast is called Illuminating Dialogues. It's really a flow of meaning to maybe go to a place we haven't gone before and illuminate ourselves, but also the listeners in the process. So, with that being said, my first question to you is, what lights you up?
Yes, I love that question. And I was thinking about it before we got on this call today. And I think for me, what I love doing the most is taking different bits of information, research, thinking through it, interpreting it, and then sharing it.
Mm,
I always give credit where credit is due. If it's my idea, great. If not, I think there's no such thing as a new idea. I think we all take ideas and reframe them or think of them differently. And so I love collecting information and then thinking through like how I might use that information and then sharing it. That's what really lights me up.
amazing. And I think I first came across you because of that piece. I was actually looking into Myers-Briggs and I was looking into Ayurveda at the time,
Mhm.
and I just came across your blogs, and you put it just so succinctly, but there's a degree of high emotional intelligence there, and I really resonated. And I think a lot of us can be stuck in that paradigm of thinking we have to reinvent the wheel or we have to create things from scratch. But there's really a skill in synthesizing our own information.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you really spoke to that well. So I'm wondering if we could just start the podcast and exploration about your journey. How did you start into this field of coaching, running workshops,
Mhm.
your modalities, maybe how you
Mhm.
went into yoga and Ayurveda as well?
Yeah, I think we teach what we need the most,
Mm,
right? So I think I needed all of those things. I remember younger, like when I was younger, I used to have these debilitating panic attacks, and I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't have the language, or, I didn't even know how to label them. And I think coming from a South Asian culture, it's like mental illness is not something that's discussed. It's almost like sweep it under the rug and just hope it goes away. And so I realized then that like this feeling that I'm having is not quote unquote normal. And
mm.
like I need to figure out what to do. So I sort of started this exploration through spiritual practices, through physical practices, through whatever could help sort of control what goes on up here, right? Because I think that's the biggest struggle for many of us.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And I just had a podcast yesterday actually on anxiety, depression in South Asian Punjabi communities. And,
Mhm.
you know, we had a lot from that and a lot of insight that I didn't realize. So, given that you had these panic attacks, I did also suffer from some anxiety, social anxiety in my university days, and I didn't really know what was going on, mainly because of the background as well. How did that then step you into these modalities? Did you go into coaching first? Did you go to Ayurveda first, or did it all just happen
Mhm.
together?
Yeah, I mean, it's all sort of this medley of so many things. But I think so. I believe that when I finished my master's at Columbia in social and organizational psychology, I set myself up for the coaching space. I mean, the master's program, there was a lot of bits of EQ and coaching and adult learning. So it kind of led into that path of coaching and facilitation and speaking. And so I think that was sort of how that part of my business evolved. And then personally, I think it all started with yoga because when I started going to yoga and starting to going to the art of living, which I'm not sure if you're
Hmm.
familiar with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar,
Yeah.
like that was really eye-opening for me. And that led me down so much. It kind of opened the spiritual floodgates, if you will, that like learning from Sri Sri and the teachings really opened up like, okay, I'm going down this path of yoga. When I was on the path of yoga, I realized like yoga comes from Ayurveda. So then Ayurveda became this thing. And then as I started exploring Ayurveda, I said, oh my goodness, it's embedded in our culture. And we
Mm.
may not even know, like the way our parents cook or the way our moms cook or the things, the customs, the rituals that we do actually are part of like this lineage of traditions and history. And it's so beautiful. And so I think when I got into the yoga space, I realized it's not just about the physical asana practice. There's so much that goes into that. And then that led me down Ayurveda. And then I just realized like it's not a religion, it's a lifestyle of how you can just be more connected to your true essence.
Fantastic. I think as you share that, maybe a lot of viewers would resonate as well. We've had some podcasts on Ayurveda, about the doshas, about how the
Yes.
science works. I had
Yes.
dal today for lunch, and that there's so much herbs, spices that I think now by science is kind of shown to help our metabolism and help healing and inflammation. So as you progress down this yogic path and understanding the eastern side, of course, I think were you born and brought up in the West in America?
I was born in India and then
Okay.
raised in the West, in the US, yes.
Okay. So how did that kind of go into the kind of Western context of coaching psychology? Because they're kind of like two separate streams, it seems like.
I feel like they're integrated if we allow them to be
Mm.
integrated. So I think one of the things that happened, and I don't know what your background story is, but when we moved from India to the US, it's like my parents took India with them and just put it in the home. It was so everything was embedded. So it was almost like when I would go back to visit my cousins, they were like, "Why are you so conservative? What's going on?" Like it was basically that my parents were time stamped in India and they brought that forward. And although India progressed, we didn't because we were sort of stuck in this time stamp component of India. And so I think I had such a huge influence of being raised with Punjabi culture, Indian culture, and then of course, when you step outside of the home, you're in Western culture, you're going to school, you're having friends that are from various backgrounds. And so I think I constantly felt this dance between being part of a collective we-based culture and then being raised in an I-based North America, very individualistic culture. And it was this fine dance. And that's actually the premise of Be Your Own Cheerleader. It's like, how do you come from a we culture, or if you're raised in a we culture, like how do you thrive in an I-based North American individualistic culture? And it's not just North America. There are other cultures that are individualistic, many European cultures. And then collective cultures, it's not just Asian cultures, it's Latin cultures, certain African cultures, Arab cultures are very family oriented, very group oriented. And when you're in those sort of structures of a group, you don't know how to identify your voice or what you like or how to speak up. And so that was really the premise of Be Your Own Cheerleader.
Amazing. And I just resonate with so many aspects of that because I'm only starting in my corporate journey. I've been in corporate for over 3 years now, and we've been having discussions in women's empowerment, D&I groups in corporate about this. But I think you put it so succinctly and so powerfully. And I personally resonate because I'm coming from the same background. In terms of my background, this YouTube channel was actually founded about my curiosity about my own roots. I was
Mhm.
born in Scotland. My mum was born in Scotland. My dad was born in Indonesia. All my grandparents are from Punjab, right? So that time capsule did happen, but
Yeah.
I'm sort of trying to rediscover my roots almost. And so what I find is, yes, I'm third generation now. So some of this I culture, some of this we culture does exist. And
Mhm.
I'm sure we'll go into that as we talk about the book and corporate culture and how this East and West blends. But I've sort of found the things you talk about in your blog, challenges I'm facing right now, and I'm sure other people watching this as well, other people in the corporate space. I know from facilitating and creating coaching workshops, that is a common thing that's happening in corporate. So I think you kind of answered the question, why did you write the book? But
Yes.
I'm just wondering what led up to that. If you could
Mhm.
paint the picture for us, what led up to, yeah, you writing Be Your Own Cheerleader.
Yeah, so I specifically remember I was sitting at my desk. It was 2013. I was doing a great job. I thought I was doing a great job. It was my first job out of grad school, and I was excited to be there. It was a good job. And I got a phone call from HR and I was just freaking out. I was like, oh no, this is happening again. I did get downsized, and also I had been downsized numerous times before. And I realized as I was sort of heading out, a security guard escorted me out. Like it wasn't even like, hey, you have a little bit of time to gather your things. They gave me a very short period of time to gather my things, and then I had to leave. And I realized when I was treated almost like a criminal, I was like, I didn't do anything wrong. And in fact, I'm really smart. I have great ideas. What is going on? Why does this keep happening? And it was sort of in that moment I realized like the people that were still left in their chairs, they were really good at speaking up. They were really good at interrupting and making sure their voice got heard. They were really good at getting credit for their ideas, and I wasn't. And then, so that was 2013. So fast forward to today, and I have literally coached and trained thousands of professionals. And I realize there's some common red threads amongst certain groups of people that struggle with speaking up and speaking out. And it doesn't even necessarily have to do with culture. It could also be that you're extremely introverted
Mm,
or neurodivergent, or you just are a subject matter expert and you're focused on your job and you don't care to speak up. You're just like, I'm just doing a great job and my work will speak for itself. And that doesn't work in the corporate landscape. I think you have to be that squeaky wheel in a respectful way to make sure that your voice is heard.
And so a lot of people may find that corporate landscape very hard to be part of. So could you paint the picture about maybe sort of why it is that way and how people can start to understand that culture and start to yeah, be a bit more appreciative of that culture, but at the same time be appreciative of their own strengths and their own cultural background.
Well, I think one thing that I find so fascinating is most organizations, you'll notice if it's in their core values or maybe it's a mission statement, there's always something about collaboration,
Mm,
to the point where there's so much emphasis on collaboration. And when in actuality, it's an individual that brings an idea forward. It's the group that helps, the operations of that idea, but ultimately it's one individual that brings up this idea. And if that individual doesn't have the skills to speak up and share their idea, everyone's at loss, the team, the organization, right? So it's a trickle down effect. Like we have to think about collaboration in the sense that collaboration helps with operations, but when it comes to innovation and really thinking ahead, we want to make sure that each person has the ability to advocate for their ideas and feel safe and comfortable to advocate. So it's like a two-pronged approach. The individual,
Mm.
the professional needs to advocate, but the organization needs to create a psychologically safe culture so that these ideas, people feel safe to share their strengths, work on what they're most passionate about, and share those ideas.
Wow. So psychological safety has come a lot in a lot of our meetings and the D&I meetings. Could you maybe paint a picture what is psychological safety for those who don't know how to create it or B, don't even know what it is?
Yeah, so psychological safety is this feeling that you can speak up without judgment, without any retaliation of your ideas, any fear-based feeling that you have about speaking in a container, and the container is usually the organization. So psychological safety allows you to be more of who you are, and we can only do that if the culture around us allows for that. And so for leaders and team managers to do that, they really have to take an initiative. It doesn't just happen on its own. It's putting things in place. It's having people get the training that they need in order to be skilled to speak up. It's organizational leaders really thinking through, how do I help this individual or these individuals leverage their strengths and work to their strengths? And
Mm.
then we also need structure around this, right? Like a structured approach of ideation, because you can have all of these ideas floating around, but we need some sort of structure to grab those ideas. And then what are we going to do with those ideas? So again, psychological safety is not just at like an organizational mandate. I think it's also the individual's responsibility to then speak up and share when they don't feel safe.
Yeah, that's really nuanced and subtle there. And I think a lot of people might not realize that at first because I would generally be quite an outspoken person, but actually going into an environment, and I think a colleague shared this when they joined as well, they felt like their neck was restricted. And we talked about
Mhm.
yoga earlier, there's certain energy centers in the
Mhm.
body. And when that feels restricted, we do find it hard to advocate for ourselves and speak our truth. So there is sort of a co creation between the individual and the culture. So I'm just wondering the common culture, sorry, the common challenges you see in the collective at present in the corporate scenario specific to women and South Asians, given that we've talked about the psychological safety.
Mhm. So, one of the things about South Asians in general is that, again, we come from this collective culture. So for you, even though it's like your parents brought that collective culture
Mm-hmm.
from your grandparents, right? So I'm sure it's embedded within your household.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens with a lot of people that come from these collective cultures is it's like it's all about group harmony. Confrontation is not encouraged. In fact, it's highly discouraged. You just want to keep the peace. You don't want to stick out. You don't want to stand out. You really don't have space to have your own opinion, right? And then you grow up through this lens, and then you're out in the world in the corporate world, whether it's corporate America or corporate in Europe, right? Like the idea is that you're out in this space that's all about self-promotion. And we have never had that behavior modeled to us. We don't even know what it looks like. So we're essentially setting ourselves up for failure because we've not been given that information, or we haven't seen it like we haven't seen anyone model that information for us. Like, how do
Mm.
you share your idea? How do you speak up? Especially for women, we're usually taught to just do what the group is doing, do what your family's doing. You just go along for the ride. And I think that poses a bit of a problem for many South Asians when they get into the corporate world.
Okay. And I was reading one of your blogs actually, and just to go a bit deeper, there was a quote like less powerful members of organizations and institutions like family accept and expect that power to be distributed unequally, which can be loosely translated as being more likely to do what you're told. So American leaders, and I guess European as well, assume that team members will provide feedback. So technologists raised in Asia or by Asians are reluctant to bring ideas and problems to their managers for fear of appearing critical. It simply isn't done. So I really resonate with that because a few
Right.
months ago, I wasn't speaking up because my workload was so high. And I
Hmm.
actually had a conversation with my manager. I actually feel guilty or shameful, which, as we know from that yogic lens, I'm feeling emotions almost south of the belly button area or north. So these are actually in the body. And when my manager was there, created a psychologically safe environment, I felt a release of emotions there. So that asked me the question, why? Why was that there in the first place? Why was I not able to advocate? So, having coached people, having done these workshops, um, why would that sort of exist, that barrier? And how can we start to overcome that barrier?
One of the other things that is prominent in collective cultures is that there is usually a higher power difference or
Mm,
power distance. So there's a deference to authority. You know, in Asian cultures, we really respect the elderly. We say there's so much wisdom there. And so there's this sort of deference to authority. And then what happens that I think may have happened in your situation, let me know if you agree or disagree. But when you come from this background, there's this almost fear of authority in a way, and then
mm,
you are in this setting of corporate and you're you're encouraged to give feedback to your manager or skip level, and it's like, wait a second, they're much more senior than I am. Like, how am I going to have this conversation? So that goes back into sort of your solar plexus and like that fear being there, because we just don't, again, we don't have the skills to speak up, and then also we're a little bit nervous and fearful, like, oh, they're so much, they're two or three levels above us in
mm,
title, and so can I have that open free conversation? And I think when you power the two things, or when you couple the two things of like coming from a collective we culture trying to keep the peace, and you couple that with the fear of authority, it could lead to sort of this shutdown in your throat chakra, right?
yes.
Like you can't speak up because it's like I there's so many different differing pieces of data within me about what should I do from a group's perspective? How do I respect this authority? And I think when you have all of that going on up here, it's
Mm.
really hard to like articulate freely and have that conversation flow.
Yeah, it's so beautifully explained, blending the Eastern and Western
Yeah.
things. It's amazing. And so those of the listeners who are watching, who may be in corporate, may have retired, but just seeing this play out actually might be quite helpful just to realize these certain, like you said, data points or strands in their thinking or in their emotions. Um, so I'm just wondering why wellness and burnout need to be addressed in this day and age as well, because of course for South Asians there might be some cultural elements there, but across the board burnout is definitely a really a thing that's happening. I'm hosting some meditations, I'm also coaching
Right.
myself, and I'm wondering, why is this starting to occur a lot more, and how can we start to support people in this process?
Yes. So there's so many things I want to discuss there, but I say the first place I want to start is really around the idea that when we don't self-advocate, it leads to burnout. Because so regardless of if you come from Asian culture or you come or you're extremely introverted or you're neurodivergent, if you take on so many things, right, at home, at work, and you're not speaking up that you need support, that leads to burnout. I think there's a relationship between self-advocacy and burnout, and I've noticed that with the organizations I've worked with. There's certain people that just are yes based. They just keep saying yes to things because there's a fear that maybe they'll lose their job, or maybe there's downsizing going on and they want to keep their job. So they just keep saying yes, 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 I'll take that on, I'll take that on, I'll take that on. And then before you know it, your whole day is packed with meetings and you have no time to think, no time to innovate, no time to create. And then you get home and you have to take care of your family or take care of your home. And it's just this recipe for burnout. So I believe it starts with self-advocacy, understanding that when you need support, it's okay to reach out to ask for support from whoever's part of your support network.
Mm. And how can we start to, as coaches or like yourself, support people with the different modalities you do? You mentioned fear. So, is there any times that you've sat with people and perhaps worked through certain thoughts or emotions based on this fear that could maybe help the viewers?
Absolutely. I think a lot of times when we have overwhelming, debilitating fear and sort of that imposter monster voice going on,
Mm,
it's usually not the adult version of us. It's usually a smaller child version of us and there's all these little parts in us that are
mm,
there, and we might be stuck at a certain age. Let's say for me, I often feel like when that fear-based voice comes, it's like 15-year-old Neelu. And so I have to have a conversation with that 15-year-old Neelu or visualize her doing something else so that the adult Neelu can emerge. A lot of this work comes from Pia Melody, where it's about taking care of these smaller parts of us so that the adult can emerge. Because when an adult is in the picture, you can rise above that fear. When the fear is overwhelming, debilitating, when you're sort of like stuck and paralyzed, it's usually an indication that it's not sort of the adult part of you that's taking over. That conversation is sort of taken over by a smaller, younger part of you. So I would say the first thing might be to identify, like, what age is it that you started feeling that sense of fear? What was going on? And when you can identify that age, it's really easy to visualize younger part of you. So for me, thinking back to 15-year-old Neelu, I can see her. I know her, right? I know her better than anyone else knows her. And so I can see her. I can let her do something she enjoyed doing with a caretaker so that she's taken care of. And the adult Neelu can get on stage and do what she needs to do, or have that coaching call, or make a very challenging decision in life, right? Like the idea is that you always take care of these younger parts of you because they're in us. They're in all of us.
mm. And I think this part's intelligence is so powerful. I've not heard of Melody that you mentioned, but I know of Dr. Richard Swartz, who talks about internal family systems and the relationships
Mhm.
between our parts. I think there's also positive intelligence that was happening in my corporate workspace as well. And it's just so interesting how some parts can obviously be overly driving part of us, very
Right.
impulsive, and the other parts, like you said, inner child could be fearful, could feel powerless, could feel trapped, and it's building that adult. And I sort of had that experience about 2 years ago, where finding out, okay, this is how it feels to be in an adult state. This is how it feels to be in a child, and actually, my voice changes and my body language changes. So it's
Mhm.
actually such a profound intelligence to tap into almost. I don't know if you find that quite helpful in your one-to-one coaching or the workshops you run as well in corporate.
Well, I think when it comes to parts work, I that would be on a one-on-one
Mm,
basis. So those are coaching clients that I work with on that. But I think when I'm speaking about a topic or when I'm doing workshops, if we introduce these concepts, sometimes in a corporate landscape, it can feel like it's out of scope,
okay.
especially if you're in a tech company, right? You're like talking to these little parts. So I always say, as a coach, as a facilitator, as a speaker, know your audience
Mm,
and know what you can do with that audience. I think it's easier to have those conversations one on one. But if you are listening to this podcast and you are in the public space or you're facilitating large workshops or speaking on large stages, we all know that you speak to your audience, and what they can digest
mm.
might be different than what someone one to one can digest with you.
Yeah, that's so true. And like speaking to your audience and how it resonates with them, because corporate is very, very different from the public space. So, given that said, talking about parts, why is it important for people to be their own cheerleader? And why collectively do you think we might find it difficult to be our own cheerleader? Because it's such a good title, I think you use. And
Thank you.
cheerleaders, it's almost, it's not like be your own, you know, critic or your parent. It's like, it's cheerleading, you're cheering yourself on. And it's such a different, yeah, it's such a different view to what's
Yes,
traditionally like we're
right,
taught, right?
right. Absolutely. I must preface this by saying that I actually tried out to be a cheerleader in middle school, and I was the least popular, the most awkward. So I didn't make it. So there was always a part of me that was like, wished I was that popular girl that could have been the cheerleader. But I think the reason that it's so challenging for us is because we think that it's selfish, or we think we're being cocky, or especially if we are raised in a group, in a collective environment, right? It's like, just stay under the radar, just do good work. Your work will speak for itself. That's not the case in the corporate space, as we all know. So I think the reasons that it can be challenging is culture. It could also be gender, right? Like as women, we probably taught younger based on who your folks are, but it's really like, just do what you're told, just go along with the whatever's going on and don't speak out, don't bring attention to yourself. If you're an immigrant, that's the case. I remember my parents would say, this isn't our country, so just do a good job. Don't raise any flags, right? Like just do your job. So when you get this messaging, it can feel like, I don't want to be boastful. I don't want to talk about myself. And so that's why I think there's this like dissonance within us about being our own cheerleader. And I think that people think it's very selfish, but I believe that when you are your own cheerleader, it's the most collective act that you could do, because as you're climbing the ranks, as you are getting promotions and raises and graduating from great programs and doing all of these great things, it's like you're leaving a trail behind you for all of the other people that look like you to follow. They may be 10 years behind you, they may be 3 days behind you, they may be 5 years behind you, but you're inspiring all of those people that look just like you. And so I think when we think of cheerleading, we're like, oh, it's such an individual act, when in fact, it's the most collective act, I think.
Wow. Yeah, and you put it so succinctly. It's just amazing. And then I really like how you go into that and your understanding your roots almost, and it's a healing thing. So like you said, other people who like myself or other people from South Asian backgrounds or Asian backgrounds will actually understand this even though if it's unconscious. So because you've done the unconscious or subconscious work, it will resonate with people even if they don't know. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I think I think if we keep that in the back of our minds, that when we're about to raise our hand to share an idea, or we're interrupting to make sure we get credit for our work, we're not just doing that for ourselves. We're doing that for all of the people that
Mm.
look like us, that are in the room. Maybe they're interns in the room, or it's like you're leaving a trail for people to be inspired behind you. And we always want to think that way, because it's not just about us individually, it's about all of us collectively.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if I could please ask you to take the time to like and subscribe to this channel. It would help us as we try to grow this channel and share our guests' deep wisdom with you and the rest of the world. What lights you up? Why do I ask this? Because I want to create a space for you to go slow to go far, and offer a space of one-to-one coaching, and I'll put some testimonials up here. This will allow you to access all of the wisdom for our Illuminating dialogues, actually integrate and implement this wisdom in your daily life for whatever means you'd like to transform, live in alignment, live in purpose, and of course live in your dharma. If that resonates with you, you can book a session directly with me on jhoty.com. If you would like to join the free community, you can also go to jhoty.com. All the links are in the description, and connect with like-minded people, where we also have a chat about the next Illuminating Dialogue podcast episodes. So thank you again, everybody, for supporting this podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this podcast. Amazing. And so how do you start to integrate your modalities like NLP, coaching, Ayurveda into the space? Because it can seem like separate things. So I'm very, very curious. And for the viewers who might not be familiar with NLP or Ayurveda, maybe just briefly describing them and then how you work in that space and help people.
Yeah, so with NLP, if anyone's familiar with Tony Robbins, he kind of has taken it and done different things to it. But in essence, NLP has been around since the 70s, and it's a communication strategy. It's basically a communication strategy. So the idea, I think the simplest way I could explain it is, I don't expect you to come to my bus stop. I will meet you at your bus stop. And as a master communicator, I have to pick up cues in order to meet you at your bus stop. I can't expect anyone that I'm communicating to meet me where I am, but I, as a master communicator, can meet you where you are. And that's basically the premise of NLP. It's like, you are here and I am there. How do I get to you, communication wise? And I think when we think of that lens, it's like, okay, we're an instrument of, and we're a vehicle to have this conversation. So how does it impact my work? I would say when I'm creating my speeches or when I am creating workshops, like I always have that in mind as to who's my audience. And I want to use language that's going to resonate with my audience. And I think similarly, individually in coaching sessions, it's teaching these skills that help people go out and self-advocate or go out and be better leaders or go out and handle, disgruntled team members, whatever the case is communication strategies that are used one to one or one to many.
I think, yeah, I never seen NLP in that way before, because I know NLP has so many different parts and goes quite deep.
Right.
Um, but this part of it could be in a family, it could be in a company setting, but meeting somebody where they're at, because often we have a certain perspective or view, but actually understanding how to meet somebody where they're at. So could you maybe slowly give us a little breakdown of how can we start to understand where somebody's at, how to meet them, and sort of
Mhm.
how to tailor our language in that way? Because it might not be
Sure.
very
Yeah.
intuitive for people.
Yeah. I think there's one easy example I can give that you'll be like, oh, that's so intuitive. I know that.
Yeah.
So when you're talking to someone, notice the words that they're using. And there's three types. They categorize it in three ways: auditory, visual, and kinesthetic.
Mm,
Right? So auditory words are all about like I hear you, but I don't understand you.
mm,
I right? Like there's words that we use that are associated with hearing. With visual, I see the big picture, but I don't understand what you're saying. Or I see the vision, right? Like you'll hear people using these see statements, like vision statements. And then kinesthetic is you could be in a meeting and you come out of the meeting and someone says, that just didn't feel right. Just didn't feel good in the gut. Like I just didn't feel good about that meeting. I didn't feel good about the way I performed, which is all about how you feel. So when you hear these words as a master communicator, you then respond in a way that they can understand. So if someone's in front of you and you're talking to them and they were like, they kept showing these slides and I see their vision, but it doesn't land. I don't understand. So the way you would then speak back is in visual language. So you would say, let me show you what the impact of XYZ is. Let me show you on a whiteboard, right? Like you're getting back to the way that this person learns and digests information, and you as a master communicator are doing that. Similarly, if they're saying that they didn't feel right after the meeting, or I just feel like I didn't perform well, or whatever the case is, then when you're speaking to them, you respond in the same sort of kinesthetic language. Does that
mm.
make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're being more sensitive to the way they are picking up, processing, and outputting that information, and you're becoming sensitive to that, and then using your language in that way, so it becomes easily comprehensible for them. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
So that's a language pattern that we can use immediately. You can just start, it's like a switch you turn on in your brain, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to start picking up on certain words that they're using. And then you'll know pretty quickly if that person is visual, auditory, or kinesthetic.
Hmm. And that goes again back to what we're talking about in terms of having some judgments or having some fears in a way. It's kind of the opposite of that, because we're taking ourselves out of ourself and trying to meet. So I think that's really beautiful in the way that you explained that.
I mean, it in some sense, and I don't know, this might be far reaching,
Hmm.
but in our culture as Sikhs and in Punjabi culture, one of the main tenets is seva, which is selfless service, where you take yourself out of the whole equation, whatever selfless service you're doing. As a communicator, it's similar. It's like it's not about you, it's about the other person. It's not about you, it's about the audience. So anytime you're engaging, if you think through the lens of seva or selfless service, you kind of can take yourself out of it. And then when you take yourself out of it, you are an instrument of whatever you're trying to deliver. And so I grew up with Seva. It's something I think about daily, even helping someone open the door who can't open the door if they have a lot of packages in their hand. Like to me, that's an act of Seva every day. So Seva is always at the top of my mind. And I think as a speaker, I use that to just take myself out of the equation, because then you don't care what you look like, what you sound like, it's not the spotlight's not on you. The spotlight is on everyone else.
That's such a big perspective shift, and it's almost like a explosion of devotion because it's coming
Yeah,
through that
I love that.
modality.
Yeah,
It's
explosion of devotion. I've
yeah,
never heard that, but that's how I feel every
yeah.
time like uh, so maybe it's not truly altruistic because I do get something out of helping,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I think for me, when I'm on stage, when I'm talking, when I'm speaking in groups and teams, I just take myself out of the equation. It's not about me. I'm like delivering whatever I need to deliver to this group of people.
And it's really coming from the heart, yeah.
Yeah.
And the we had a coach on, Amrit, who's also from a Sikh background. It's funny because he also said the same about Seva, and that really
Yeah.
resonates with me because often, sometimes when we present or we're presenting whatever, it could be engineering, a technical idea, sometimes we're doing it from a place of me or I,
Hmm.
but this really flips the whole perspective, and I think it can be helpful for people of this background who know what Seva is or who don't simply self this service. So,
I think that's such a good point. And also, like when you are that engineer that's giving the idea, you are still collectively helping, but you're still putting the spotlight on your idea. So this be your own cheerleader, it's so nuanced,
mm,
right? Because it's like you want to bring everyone with you. That's the collective part of us, but then there's also this part of like, well, it's also my idea. So I want to make sure that in this professional setting, like I'm getting credit for my work.
right, okay. Yeah,
So it's
that's
like
really
this
nuanced,
fine
yeah.
dance between the individual and the collective part of us.
Yeah, because we have talked about yeah, on the more eastern side, the what's it called? Ego of the humble or ego of the
Hmm.
egoless, which is like,
Hmm.
oh no, like I'm very quiet, like you mentioned before. And then there's obviously the opposite of that, but like that nuance is really, really important for people to hear so they don't just fall to one side.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. So I would love to, because I actually stumbled upon your page because of MBTI Myers-Briggs, and we have talked in depth one of the earlier podcasts about Myers-Briggs. If you've found you use this modality at all in your coaching, um, in our corporate space, HR do use that. So I'm wondering
Hmm.
if you use that in your coaching as well to those listeners, and if you could tell a bit about how you use this as well.
So one of the things that I find so fascinating, because in my grad school program, we learned about all of these assessments like MBTI, DISC, Hogan,
Mm-hmm.
FIRO-B. There's so many, right? Mesquite. Like there's all these ones that and it's not that I'm not a proponent of it. I'm certified in DISC. If someone comes to me in a coaching conversation and they want me to administer the DISC, I will absolutely do that. I often find that if they come with these assessments, they've put themselves in these boxes. So sometimes I feel like it really depends on the person of if we want to bring in that report and see like what is the things that they're working on, or I would like to have sort of this chemistry call with them and just look at them in my mind through the lens of Ayurveda, because that's always my first level of assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Like I will always look and say, okay, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this person is a Pitta Vata, and a Pitta Vata would get aggravated with XYZ. And then if they bring me the MBTI or they bring me the disc or they say administer the disc, I think I can couple and layer, but I think my first assessment tool in my mind is Ayurveda because I believe that's the most powerful.
Yeah, and I've been through some studies that Carl Jung actually did spend some time looking into the ancient Indian wisdom, and I think MBTI, at least the 16 cognitive functions, is derived from the dosha elements. So,
Oh, I
um,
did not.
yeah, so that's why there's quite a resonance there. So I started off with MBTI, and that's how I
Yeah,
journeyed into Ayurveda. Yeah, so it's
interesting.
very, very interesting. So just for those viewers who maybe haven't watched my previous podcasts on Kapha Pitta Vata. Um, for example, me talking to me, if you would be able to paint for the viewers a picture about that as an example.
Right. So let's say, I mean, I would have to do more assessment to see,
Mm-hmm.
I believe you're Pitta Vata or Vata Pitta.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, for example, and again, I wouldn't assume this. I would ask certain
Mm-hmm.
questions. I would ask questions about, oh, I'll give you a perfect example. There was a client that I had a few years ago who came to me and was he was a leader of a very large team, and he kept blaming his team. Like he said, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this. And the minute I looked at him and I was in his office and I looked at him, I realized like he's got a lot of pitta aggravation because there was a lot of breakouts on his face, and he was kept drinking something that was like soothing his stomach. So he had some like acid reflux go on, which is a first indication of a pitta or fire imbalance, right? And so I realized like he actually was just burning himself out so much so that he wasn't sleeping well. So when we talked about different sleep approaches, he became a much easier manager to deal with.
Mm,
And the problems that the team had sort of melted away. He was better equipped to handle those issues. So I think oftentimes with Ayurveda, it's like the person you're coaching might not even think about these things because they're like, oh, you're an executive coach. You're coming in to talk about managing a dysfunctional team. But we actually had a few sessions just on sleep hygiene and making sure he got the sleep that he needed, which helped him be a better leader. So I think when we start incorporating the Eastern and Western approaches, it can be a miraculous transformational shift for a person in coaching as well.
yeah, so powerful. And because that Ayurveda has a holistic approach where we're taking the human being as part of the whole ecosystem, we did talk
Right.
about with Dr. Sujata on one of the previous podcasts about Vata kind of actually in a job role being very creative, Pitta kind of
Mm-hmm.
taking that creativity and almost driving it, and then Kapha being able to be consistent and
Mm-hmm.
deliver the results, where Vata people might find it hard to stick to that consistency, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I
Absolutely.
can speak to that. So have you found that bringing Ayurveda into the corporate workspace, have you found those type of patterns playing out, and how, if so, like how have you used that in that context?
Well, during COVID, there was just this big uncertainty, chaos. So I created a whole series of workshops that were rooted in Ayurveda, all about managing distractions and well-being in work. So tying it to productivity, because again, in corporate space, it's always tied to productivity. So I created these workshops rooted in Ayurveda. And then if anyone was interested to learn more, they would then reach out and say, I would love to have a one-on-one consultation with you. But I think, Ayurveda is such a specific, like individual lifestyle choice. And I think when we're working with groups, we want to make it accessible to all, and then we can customize maybe a plan if we're working with an individual. But I do think that some of the things that are 5,000 years old are still, I mean, are also applicable today. We just have to be the instrument that communicates it and makes it more relatable.
100%. And there almost seems to be sometimes a gap, like you said, with the metrics between D&I, let's say councils, and HR, right? Because one side we have the well-being and yeah, human wellness, and the other side, the HR, we have the metrics and the KPI. Um, so how do you see people almost bridging that gap in corporate? Because sometimes what's measured is very difficult to or sorry, what's measured as KPI and productivity, and sometimes it's very difficult to measure. Let's say this guy, he's Pitta and Pitta aggravated, and he's got better sleep. It's very hard to translate that into productivity. So how can you start to build this culture and bring this almost intelligence in to the corporate and
Hmm.
sensitivity?
Yeah, I love this question. So, as you know from your conversations and your study of Ayurveda, you realize that each dosha has a prime time when that dosha is the most alert, active, and aware. So
Mm,
let's say Pitta is your prominent or dominant dosha. You know that from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., you are prime time. From 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., you are prime time. So if you're going to have a challenging conversation, difficult work to do, you want to make sure you bucket it in that time. If you're interviewing and you need to be sharp and alert and awake, you bucket in that time. Similarly, that's the individual taking ownership. Similarly, having a conversation with your manager about, I know this is a challenging conversation to have, but some environments allow some flexibility of when you're working. So you may be one of those people like, I'm a night owl. I need some time during the day to just take care of myself. And then I can work till the wee hours of the night. That's the pitta in me, right?
mm,
So the idea is that you have these conversations about peak productivity. You don't talk about Ayurveda or your dosha necessarily, but you bring it all back to productivity. I am the most productive from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. This is when I want to do XYZ. And so you first get the awareness of what your peak times are and then have that conversation. And then ideally, you're in an environment, in a culture that helps you leverage your strengths, and your productivity time is absolutely a strength.
mm. It's so powerful, the detail and nuance you go to, because often we can be in this culture where it expects kind of 24/7 productivity output, but having that nuance, especially between men and women, right? We have different cycles of productivity, different energy levels. We talked about this before, and then also between the different dosha types, we have that different productivity level. So really bringing that nuance and that clarity behind productivity is really powerful.
I mean, I actually go to the extent of when I see, like, for example, we are doing this closer to Vata time, but I knew that I wanted to be alert and awake. So we're still kind of still a little bit past Pitta time, but I always do podcast media things like between that 11 and 2 p.m.
Mm.
chunk, because that's when I'm like, everything's like working.
Okay, amazing. That's a tip I think I'll keep in mind because it's
Yeah.
already, um, yeah, slowing down for us
Yeah,
in
you're
Scotland.
in kapha time. You
We're
need
in
to rest.
Kappa.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. Yeah, so it's fantastic. So, yeah, I would love to just to slowly wrap up on just how, what piece of wisdom would you like to leave people with, given that we've discussed how to advocate for yourself, how to listen to others and perspective shift using NLP, and then also bringing, Ayurveda. A lot we covered, so thank you in that last
Yeah, we
chat.
covered so much.
Yeah.
I think my biggest wish for everyone is that being your own cheerleader in all situations. So, how we are in one situation is how we will be in another situation. So, if you struggle to speak up for yourself at work, chances are you struggle to speak up for yourself at home. So, practice where it's safer until you can flex that advocacy muscle to practice at work. So, you might just have a conversation with your partner or your parents and say you want to do something. Or, for me, it was a simple act of telling my husband, I actually don't want pizza, I want Thai food, right? Like that's an act of self-advocacy. I was told and modeled. My mom just went along with whatever my dad wanted. She really didn't have an opinion for herself. So even raising awareness to the fact that I have an opinion, I like what I like, and sharing that is a form of self-advocacy that you can practice in safer environments. And then you'll slowly start feeling comfortable to practice in a more challenging environment, which could be work.
Wow, so powerful. Thank you for sharing that with the viewers. I know a lot of people who would resonate with that. And if people want to reach out for you for support, they want to connect with you, maybe for some coaching or for their own company, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah, you can reach out via LinkedIn, Neelu Kaur, website, neelukaur.com, and email, neelu@neelukaur.com. So it's all very easy. And Be Your Own Cheerleader is on Amazon and everywhere that you can read books. So it's
Wonderful.
really easy to get a hold of me.
Cool. And I'll link it all in the description below for those who are watching on YouTube.
Perfect.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again, Nilu.
Thank
So
you.
much confidence, so much wisdom, so much inspiration. I just really appreciate you sitting down and sharing this with me and all of
Thank
yours.
you so much. And remind me what the phrase was, explosive devotion. Was that what you
Explosion
said?
of devotion.
Explosion of devotion. I'm going to take that with me. I think that's so beautiful.
Yeah, I use that for my Bhangra dancing.
I love that.
Cool. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. And
Yes, of course. My pleasure.
thank you everybody for watching.